I show glenohumeral instability, but multidirectional instability has very controversial points of view, and also it is really a challenge for orthopedic surgeons because it's a complex condition. Uh, Erika mentioned this paper, even though the multidirectional instability or the traumatic instability, in fact, was described initially by Hippocrates more than 25 centuries ago. The first time that we have a clear presentation of the problem, I agree, based in a technique more than in the clinical examination or in the condition itself, was by Neer and Foster in the 80s. And at least this put the topic in discussion for the big audience of shoulder surgeons. In the 90s, we got another possibility to see the different types of instabilities, thinking about the TAPS and the AMBRI, the traumatic, the atraumatic, and fundamentally two types of patients. The patient with a normal shoulder that after a trauma develop an instability, and a patient with a predisposition to develop this type of instability, which the extreme example was the Ehlers-Danlos disease. The Baton score was considered important to detect the laxity and hypermobility, as we all know, and it became very popular. But there were some other tests like the sulcus test. We can see here in this same patient the thumb sign. So we used to face this kind of cases, and there were even described different tests like the test described by Gerber, that it was the anterior drawer test and posterior drawer test. But we also have the chance to see this type of people. This was a medical student with no symptoms, that when I was talking about multidirectional instability, she showed me what she could do, but she had no problems with her joints. So we began to think, well, which is the threshold between the normal people and the people that have problems? We know that there is a big variety of levels of laxity that can be influenced by sex. Women generally have more laxity than men, age, younger people, and even race. There have been shown that comparing different countries, there are different levels and percentages of laxity. We also know that for some sports, hyperlaxity or hypermobility is kind of an adaptive reaction of the joint, for instance, in swimmers or in throwers. So in these cases, not be a pathology. And these papers were very interesting. One by Emery that states that general joint laxity was not an important characteristic of patients with positive signs of instability. And on the right, you can see that the laxity, the magnitude of glenohumeral translation is not a specific test for the diagnosis of glenohumeral instability. So as Erika said, the use of laxity tests by themselves and generally lead us to an overestimation of patients suffering MDI, but we also know that there are many patients with MDI that are not diagnosed. So we have both extremes in the daily practice. All these discussions led Emery to ask if MDI does really exist, and I think that a classification that gave us much more information about this, and for me it's a very interesting tool to work with, is the tremor classification, because in this triangle made by Bailey, it gives us the idea that the patients are not TAPS or AMBRI, but there are a lot of gray areas in which the patient can be located. And we can also see that patients during the natural history of their instability can move from one point to other point. There were also, many years ago, ideas about the rehab, just thinking on the capsule and thinking about the hyperlaxity. And Rockwood, that let's use this paper as a homage to him that passed away 3 weeks ago, published with Wayne Barrett this paper, that I feel is a very important paper in shoulder surgery, because give us the option of using rehab to treating instability. And generally, we surgeons, we do not take time speaking about these topics. They treat a group of patients with shoulder instability with a rehab program, and they realize that they have good results in atraumatic instability, especially in posterior inferior instability, better results in the absence of dislocation, no difference related to age, sex, and evolution, and also report bad results with traumatic instability, especially if there was trauma and dislocation. Also, surgery used to look just to the capsule, and techniques, the most popular techniques were inferior capsular shift, then arthroscopic plication, and thermal capsular roughing, but always thinking about the capsule. But there are other structural factors that are related to instability and play a role in the etiology of multidirectional instability. And we must consider the rotator interval, the inferior labrum, and the glenoid version. As we know, the rotator interval has a very important role in inferior and posterior stabilization of the shoulder. Sometimes we found an insufficient rotator interval. We make the application of the rotator interval during the surgery, but sometimes it is even not enough, and we must go ahead with reconstruction. And the coracoacromial ligament is used in some cases to reconstruct the rotator interval, as we can see in this cadaver in which we perform that technique. What about the inferior labrum? We know that it has really a lot of importance in keeping stability. It is the deeper area of the labrum, and they have been described specific lesions that can appear in patients with multidirectional instability, for instance, Kim lesion in the posterior inferior labrum, that we should consider when treating these patients. The jerk test and the Kim test are good options to evaluate the posterior inferior labrum, and the combination of both of them have a very high sensitivity to detect posterior inferior labral lesions. What about glenoid retroversion? Well, in some patients, it is important and it is a factor to be considered. Fortunately, it's not common, but we should also evaluate the retroversion when dealing with patients with multidirectional instability. But not all are structural factors. There are also functional factors that we have underestimated for a long time. And we must consider in these patients the presence of changes in muscle activity, altered corticospinal control, improper scapular positioning, and abnormal muscle recruitment. And that is a very important point, because we know now that the neurology has a lot of importance in the type of instability that these patients develop, and that we will not be able to correct all the etiologic factors using the scalpel. We need to know that there is another area, another universe that was there for a long time and we did not recognize. That's why I think it is very important to consider the Stanmore classification, because they make a point about the polar type 3 instability, in which there is laxity, but there is also a alteration on the muscle patterning. And if we treat these patients as we used to treat with rehab, the type 2, just patients with laxity, may strengthening the muscles, we will just make the problem bigger. Rehab is still the first choice in patients with multidirectional instability. We stabilize the scapula, we strengthen the rotator cuff, we must treat the corticospinal dysfunction, improve proprioception, but in some patients, it may be insufficient and we need to move ahead to surgery. I want to make clear that, for instance, Dr. Rockwood used to treat these patients with rehab in cases of posterior inferior instability for 1 year before considering that rehab was not working, because we know and we discuss this with the patient at the beginning of the process of the treatment, that we have a long road to walk together. I want to show you a case in which this was not enough and we needed to go ahead with surgery. It was a 42 years old female with a bipolar disorder treated with lithium, and this is something that is frequent to have some psychological associated problems in some of these patients. This lady used to have several episodes of instability every day, and even she used to faint in the street when having the instability episodes. She was a single mother of a 18-month-old daughter, so there was not just her personal problem, was a social problem as well. And she had a long history of problems with her shoulders, but no big problems. Till in 2002, she had a traumatic episode on her right shoulder, and she was operated with a diagnosis of acute bursitis. And this is a good example of how many times MDI is not recognized, and some surgeons treat the consequence of the MDI, perhaps the most evident consequence, because in many cases instability is very subtle. But this patient kept on having problems, and the shoulder was getting more and more unstable till she developed a voluntary and positional instability. When I first examined her 6 or 7 years ago, she had on the contralateral shoulder a very clear laxity, very clear sulcus sign. And during this first consultation, she had 3 episodes of dislocation, just spontaneous dislocation. And fortunately, she didn't faint. You can see here, this was recorded by her. You can see what she can do with her shoulder, and she, as you see, have the chance to voluntarily dislocate her glenohumeral joint. So what to do? Well, we try rehab, and I can tell you that the one who almost fainted was the physiotherapist, because dealing with this lady was very difficult because of the amount of instability. The MRI was showing a lesion, perhaps it was an injury of the labrum. There was not clear. We discussed this with a very experienced radiologist, and was not clear if there was a lesion or not. There was a very small Hill-Sachs lesion in the CT scan, and no more than that. As you see, in many of these cases, the studies are almost normal. So we decided, with the approval of her psychiatrist, to go ahead with surgery. The diagnosis was a polar type 3 instability, and we performed an arthroscopic evaluation. The labrum was intact, was no problem, was not necessary to perform nothing. We evaluate the anteroinferior labrum and the posterior-inferior labrum, and then we operate in beach chair position, perform an open capsule application and closure of the rotator interval. This is the procedure that InHo have shown. We develop two flaps, a medial flap that goes laterally and up, and a lateral flap that goes medially and also goes cranially or cephalic. And this was the result. Fortunately, the patient, we get involved as surgeons in her follow-up and her rehabilitation. As you can see, it's not a big incision in these patients with such laxity. It is easy to get even to the rotator interval with that incision. And fortunately, she had 7 years now of surgery and is doing well. So MDI exists. It is multifactorial, and we must consider not only structural changes, but also functional problems. Laxity by itself is not as essential as we used to think many years ago. We must consider neurological disorders associated with these patients. Rehab is of fundamental importance and generally is our first choice. I feel very comfortable with open capsule application because it is a very solid construction. We overlap the capsule. We cut the capsule and overlap the two flaps. The posterior inferior labrum should be evaluated, and in some cases we should consider the shape of the glenoid and think if it is necessary to perform an osteotomy. Fortunately, I did not face one of these kind of patients yet.